The incredible success of movies like, for example, Godzilla Minus One, who's just way beyond what I was expecting, and I love that movie. And movies like Oppenheimer, and the incredible failure of a lot of the superhero movies or the big budget movies that come out this year from Disney and Warner Brothers and the big companies, is, it illustrates a problem that's been going on in Hollywood. Now, what I want to talk about in this video is, where did this actually begin? When did this actually start? You're going to hear a lot of different opinions about this. And some of you are going to have a lot of opinions as well. We all know that. Some people are going to have the opinion that Hollywood began to really change somewhere in the 1990s, where it started to become a bit more commercialized, a bit more clean cut, and we started seeing a lot more sort of bigger budgeted films, and we saw the onset of CG. It wasn't what it became later on, but that started in the late 90s. Now, you could say that was the beginning of sort of Hollywood kind of forgetting how to make movies, but I don't think that's necessarily the case, because while I feel like technologically speaking, the advancements that we made in the world of Hollywood filmmaking in the 90s were definitely great. You could even make the argument that those made in the 2000s and the 2010s may have been even better. Now, what I mean by that is, if you watch movies that are CG productions or heavy in CG in 2002, they don't look anywhere near as real as what we get now. Not even close. You can look at anything from superhero films to Star Wars, and you can notably tell that whether or not you love or hate the prequels of Star Wars, you can't deny that the CGI in those movies does not look as good as even some of the more recent Star Wars movies, even the ones that are bad. The CG is the one thing that has improved for the most part in cinema. But here's the thing. It's like what George Lucas said during the era of Return of the Jedi, and that is, a special effect without a story is a pretty simple thing, is what I think he says. Something, I could be paraphrasing that. But he's basically saying that, yes, we have access to all these tools, and yes, while I do prefer practical effects to CG, I like the idea of CG accomplishing the impossible and maybe even fixing up issues. I don't like the ideas of it being overdone. At the same time, it's kind of the way movies are made now. That's not really the problem, because you can have movies that have CG in them and still tell a great story. In fact, look at how wonderful Pixar movies were for so many years, and they were, basically a lot of them were computer generated animation. Toy Story has a very different look from the traditionally animated Disney films, and it works. The look of it works, and that was back in 96. So that goes back to tell you my point about the 90s was true. But I'm not sure if that's really where Hollywood fell apart, because like I said, we've had access to these tools and still been able to put great movies. I think another big theory that I've heard, and this is one that I do agree with to a degree, is that there are just too many superhero movies. And I talked about this during Phase 3. I remember discussing, that was back in 2018, 2019. I remember talking to some friends about this, saying eventually this bubble's going to burst. It may not happen right away, but there will come a time when the public gets tired of superhero movies. Now, I can say that and say maybe we've hit that now, but there's also evidence against that. Well, what's the evidence? Well, shows on streaming that feature superheroes still do pretty well, like The Boys on Amazon. That's really beloved now, and that's just one example. You've also got certain movies that still connect with people that have superheroes. Like, for example, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. You wouldn't call that movie a flop, and it had heroes that you care about. Same thing with Spider-Man No Way Home. It's just everything else around it that isn't capturing the imagination of people. Well, there are things that Spider-Man No Way Home and Guardians of the Galaxy 3 have that a lot of other movies don't. And the main thing they have is heart. When you really think about it, Guardians 3 had a lot of heart, a lot of emotion, the backstory, of Rocket and all that stuff, and the sort of the where the characters wound up, was very emotional. And then if you look at Spider-Man No Way Home, they were invoking a tremendous amount of nostalgia in that movie and throwing references to things that made people emotional. Like, for example, you can't deny that when Andrew Garfield's Peter saves MJ, you can't deny that that wasn't an atonement for what happened in Amazing Spider-Man 2. Yes, it's an Easter egg, but it's meant to be an emotional connection, because in this story, this time Peter did it. Man, I had a good time watching No Way Home in theaters. You could even go so far as to say, and you're going to have a lot of folks say this, that when personal politics became a big part of Hollywood, that's where it started to be bad. Now, there's been politics in Hollywood for a very long time, but the one thing that people have noticed in that in the last few years, you've had this sort of rise of wokeism. Now, I'm one of the YouTube channels on here that I don't gauge the quality of a film on wokeness above everything else. I like to look at the story, the characters, and how the movie makes me feel. Whether it's woke or not, it does not matter to me. It matters how it makes me feel. Does the comedy make me laugh? Does the action movie keep me excited and entertained? Does the heartfelt movie make me tingly? You know what I mean? The heart. Like, it really comes down to how well that's executed. You understand? And some of that has to do with experiences. There are such things as objectively good and objectively bad movies, but the wokeness, I think, is only a part of the issue. I think that having studios put in certain messages for a certain minority group of people, I think that there's a benevolence to that. They want to show equality. Their whole purpose behind this is to show equality. Really, what their purpose is to make money. Because let's not kid ourselves. I have a lot of friends in the LGBT community who absolutely hate all of the gay pandering that movies do because it feels very forced and very fake. I've got friends that are black. I mean, I'm part black, and I can tell you that you have movies that feel like they're doing that sort of representation thing purposely. Now, in other movies, it's not necessary. In some, in other movies, they don't care that much. But in a lot of the movies from the big budget film companies, you can tell they're kind of doing that, even if it's very, very subtle. You can just tell. And Godzilla Minus One proved that everybody in that movie is Japanese. And yet all these Americans in this country, all these, hodgepodge of people in this country, not just Americans, you got Latin people, you got Europeans, you got people from all over the country in the United States are loving this movie. Something about this movie connected to people beyond just having the character look like me. I'm a Hispanic male. If there was a Hispanic superhero like Blue Beetle, I will. Great. I'm glad that you gave my people a character. It's not that important to me. If there was never a Blue Beetle, I wouldn't have been upset because I don't really view things from a race thing. I actually think it's kind of racist in a weird way to kind of look at everything. Not everything's about race. And if you make it about race, you have to look at yourself and say, okay, what about this is so important? Now, for me, I don't think any of these things, I think all these things do have something to do with it. I think they're all part of a bigger problem here. I think the biggest problem with Hollywood and the reason why only a small handful of filmmakers actually get to make great movies still. Anybody in the studio system ends up not doing well. Guys like Christopher Nolan can still make the movie he wants to make. Quentin Tarantino. A lot of these guys don't really work in the studio system the way that other directors do. But if you sign up to do a movie for Warner Brothers or Marvel, excuse me, you've got to play by their rules. If you want to be a filmmaker and you direct a movie for Disney, you have to do what they want you to do. And that, to me, inhibits creativity. Ultimately, I think the real reason as to why foreign cinema, not just Godzilla Minus One, why foreign cinema is feeling so much better. Train to Busan, I Saw the Devil, Parasite. These are all foreign movies, most of them from the Asian market, that have been so critically acclaimed lately. And it's been that way for longer than lately, but it feels like it's more the case now. And it's because of the fact that the Hollywood system, and when you have Disney and Warner Brothers, it's mostly Disney, you have movies that are now being made by a group of people and not one filmmaker. You've got a corporate, it's all corporate now. It's all about how can we make the most movies to milk the most out of this product that costs the least amount of money, that will still look big enough and get us a return on our investment. All of that right there is what's hurting the Hollywood system. You don't see great films. There are still great movies being made. Don't get me wrong, but you don't ever see that greatness if a movie is being created by a number of corporate entities and they're trying to cram in so many things to check off those boxes to make sure they make the most amount of money by pandering to minorities And it's not so much that something is woke and unwoke. That's not what it is, man. You got to think deeper than that. Some of you only think to that level. Think a little bit deeper. There's something else going on here besides just that. I can understand why something woke would bother people. I get it. I understand that folks don't like being pandered to. I get it. It's more so, it's deeper than that. It's like, why are they pandering? They're pandering because the corporations just want to make money however way they can, and it's almost like they don't even care for quality anymore. And if you don't believe me, look at the writer's strike. If the writer's strike does not tell you that what I'm telling you is true right now, bro, think real hard. The writer's strike is happening because Hollywood wants to get rid of it did happen. It's over now because Hollywood wants to get rid of writers and replace them with AI. Now, I want you to think about what I just told you. They're getting rid of writers, human beings. It doesn't matter if they're on the left, the right, the middle. Doesn't matter who they voted for. These are real human beings with real ideas. They're getting rid of them and instead wanting to use AI. Why do they want to use AI? Because they feel that they don't need any more humans to write these stories if a computer can do it for free. Okay? The problem is, how can a computer tell a great story if it doesn't even understand humanity? Maybe there is going to be an AI system that can tell a real story, but it's not going to be authentic. It's going to be even more inauthentic. And that goes back to the point I was making to you, that it's not authentic. People can watch Godzilla Minus One and know that it's authentically made. Toho Studios is a big Japanese studio, but they're nowhere near the size of Disney. They're not. And they also don't get too heavily involved in their director's work. They usually let the directors do what they want and trust their vision. With Disney, you've got them watching everything and over. Forget the woke. Like I said, it's way beyond that. It's more than that. They might even start putting out movies that are more like kind of straight laced, but still have sort of the opposite message, just to have people from that side of the fence buy them. It's whatever makes them money, right? And when they start worrying too much about having certain inclusions in the movies, it could take away from the story. Now, there are some stories that inclusion works. Obviously, there are some stories where it makes sense to do it. But when that becomes the priority over a story, like over the importantness of us getting to relate to and appreciate characters. You don't care about a story if you don't care about the characters. And I think they just haven't been writing characters for us to care about that much anymore. That's the problem. That's the issue. We need better characters. That's what we need. We don't need them to check off a list of things that need to be in movies. We need them to check off the most important thing, which is great characters. Now, unfortunately, you're always going to have bad movies because one person's trash and another man's treasure. There's going to be movies that come out from different people that just won't connect. It is what it is. But I think the reason why Hollywood captured our imagination so much in the 70s and 80s compared to now is probably because of that. Because the corporation stood out of it, and if they lost money, they'd figure out a way to make more money later. But it really did feel like things were more authentic. And the ironic thing about all of it is, the more authentic something is and the less forced it is, the more people will come back and watch it again and again. Godzilla Minus One was not well promoted, and yet people kept watching it again and again and again. Because it's a good movie that they connected to. It's the characters. I have friends that have never even watched a Godzilla movie that love this movie. Loved it. They aren't even fans of Godzilla. It doesn't matter. It's the characters. And if you can't get the characters right, then it doesn't matter how many different types of representation you have in your movie. It's going to flop. It's going to fail in the eyes of people. So ultimately, that's the deepest way it goes for y'all, man. I'm always very honest when I say things, and I have to think outside the box. I don't have to think in very simplistic terms. I'm a very abstract thinker, and it just goes way beyond that. Hollywood has become way too corporate, and we need to go back to like them funding some independent cinema and them allowing some different types of stories to be told that may connect with people, as long as it's a well-written story. And replacing people with computers is the opposite of the right thing to do. Take care.